the Beatles. Jimmie Nicol, standing in for drummer Ringo Starr, who's sick at home, must be...
Hello and welcome to Classic Rock Facts. We are the channel celebrating our shared cultural history of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. If you're one of our 11,000 subscribers, thank you. Please check out our extensive video library. We cover the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, The Who, Kate Bush, and many more. Growing up in the 60s, we all dreamed of being one of the Beatles at the height of Beatlemania. Whether it was after watching them on The Ed Sullivan Show or listening to one of their albums, it all seemed so cool. The screaming crowds, the long hair, and above all, the super catchy tunes. Well, there was one person on Earth that had that wish come true for one brief moment. For 13 days, English drummer Jimmie Nicol was a Beatle. He rode in the limousines, waved to the screaming fans from the stairs of the plane, and sat with John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison for television interviews at the height of Beatlemania. He also sat on stage behind Ringo's Ludwig drum kit emblazoned with the classic Drop T Beatles logo on the bass head. He even wore Ringo Starr's stage outfit, which was too small for him. You can see in this video from May 6, 1964 in Holland, the suit is too tight to button the top button like the other three Beatles. I've seen this somewhere before.
Then what do you need me for?
Because you fit the suit.
The suit? That the reason you wanted me? Because I fit the suit?
At times since 1964, Jimmie Nicol has been positive about his experience. At other times, he has said some nasty things about it. However, for the longest amount of time, he has said, well, nothing at all. James George Nicol was born on August 3, 1939, in London, England. Jimmie was a choir boy at Honeywell Road School in Battersea. He came from a musical family. He participated in the Boys Brigade and the Army Cadet Corps. Unlike the other Beatles, Jimmie was the only one who could actually read music. He played drums and xylophone. He grew up on big band music, citing Cannonball Adderley as a major influence. After playing at London's Two Eyes Coffee Bar, Jimmie Nicol began to gain traction as the drummer for Colin Hicks and the Cabin Boys. Here is Jimmie Nicol with the Cabin Boys, tearing it up in the 1958 Italian music documentary, Europa di Notte. Check this out. Jimmie was an in-demand session drummer. In 1963, singer Tommy quickly recorded the Lennon-McCartney song called Tip of My Tongue. He was managed by Brian Epstein. Jimmie Nicol had played drums on that song long before he entered the Beatles' orbit. Jimmie had been paid £5 for that session work. Jimmie had also played drums on the Top 6 album called Beatlemania. It was a budget-priced sound-alike album. But that meant Jimmie knew the Beatles' catalog. Even though Beatles producer George Martin recommended Jimmie to fill in for Ringo in 1964, Jimmie was not the first choice. He was third. First choice was Ray Duvall, the drummer for Emile Ford and the Checkmates. Second choice was Bobby Graham. Graham had been asked to replace Pete Best in 1962, but turned it down. He said he didn't want to work with a Liverpool band with no chart success. Some of the songs that Bobby Graham played on were You Really Got Me and All Day and All of the Night by the Kinks, Downtown by Petula Clark, and Glad All Over and Bits and Pieces by the Dave Clark Five, and We Gotta Get Out of This Place by the Animals. By early 1964, Jimmie Nicol was now the drummer for the Shubdubs. Across London, the Beatles were preparing to start their first ever world tour. It would start on June 4th in Denmark and run through September in New York. The band had been playing constantly since January. They had also recorded the Hard Day's Night album, so they were very tight as a band. They had performed in February on The Ed Sullivan Show to a record-setting television audience of over 73 million viewers. Here is a bit of Beatles trivia for you. How much were the Beatles paid for their appearance on Ed Sullivan? This is the Beatles' contract for the Miami appearance on February 13th. Ed Sullivan paid them $3,500, with the specific clause, to be evenly divided. So each Beatle pocketed a cool $875. Fast forward just 3 years, and looking at the contract for the August 1966 show at Dodger Stadium, the price of a Beatles concert was $295,000. An 8,328% fee increase. On the morning of Wednesday, June 3, 1964, the Beatles were at Prospect Studios being photographed for the Saturday Evening Post. Ringo had a sore throat and a fever of 102. He was taken to University College Hospital and was diagnosed with what today we call tonsillopharyngitis, a fancy name for a sore throat. This is not when Ringo had his tonsils removed. That would not happen for 6 months. This was just to treat his sore throat. With a sold-out concert scheduled for the next day in front of 4,500 excited fans at Tivoli Gardens in Copenhagen, Brian Epstein did not want to cancel the upcoming sold-out shows. John and Paul were okay with using a fill-in drummer. George, however, wanted to cancel the concerts until Ringo returned. He did not want to use a fill-in drummer. The decision was quickly made to go ahead with the world tour as planned and use a temporary drummer until Ringo could join up with the band at a later date. The first choice was Ray Duvall. The second choice was Bobby Graham. Both Duvall and Graham said no because of pre-existing engagements. George Martin had remembered Jimmie Nicol from the Tommy Quickly sessions and knew that he was familiar with the Beatles' set list. By 3 p.m. that same day, John, Paul, and George were rehearsing with Jimmie at Abbey Road Studios. With time ticking away, Brian made Jimmie an offer. He received a Beatle haircut, Beatle boots, and a tailor-adjusted Ringo's suit to fit Jimmie. In exchange, Jimmie would end up being paid a check for £500 and an engraved Eternomatic watch. He had been earning £30 a week at the time, so this was about 5 months of pay. Inaccurate reports of Jimmie being paid a $2,500 retainer and $2,500 a show are urban myths and not factual. It was also made clear to Jimmie that this was a temporary gig, and that Ringo would be back ASAP. Jimmie had literally gone from laying on his couch to drumming for the Beatles within 24 hours. Jimmie was married with a toddler named Howie. But now he was part of the Beatle machine. Limos, hotels, screaming fans, interviews, and partying. Here is a quote that Jimmie gave describing the post-concert festivities that took place after a Beatle concert. Paul is not the clean chap he wants the world to see. His love of blonde women and his general dislike of the crowds are not told. John, on the other hand, enjoyed the people, but used his sense of humor to ward off any that he didn't care for. He also drank in excess. He had drunk so much the night before that he was on stage sweating like a pig. George was not shy at all, as the press has tried to paint him. He was into sex as well as partying all night with the rest of us. I was not even close to them when it came to mischief and carrying on. I thought I could drink and lay women with the best of them until I caught up with these guys. The Beatles' world tour continued on. Denmark, Netherlands, Hong Kong, and Australia. Jimmie played 10 shows as drummer in the Beatles. In the Netherlands, he stayed out all night drinking and visited a house of ill repute with John. In Hong Kong, he was able to walk the streets without being noticed to see the boats in the harbor. Music-wise, in Denmark and the Netherlands, Jimmie missed count-ins because of all the screaming. But by Hong Kong and Australia, he was so comfortable that he would play drum fills after the songs ended and while Paul, George, and John were bowing. Ringo would never do this. After the first few shows, Paul asked Jimmie how it was going. Jimmie responded, "It's getting better all the time." And according to John, he may have begun to believe he could stay in the band permanently, like Ringo did with Pete Best. Here is John Lennon discussing Jimmie and his time in the Beatles.
Jimmie Nicol, the stand-in for Ringo in Australia, kept saying when they'd ask him something, he said, "It's getting better all the time." That's where we all got that better. All right, another memory lane from Jocko Flynn.
By the time the Beatles reached Adelaide, Australia, word came that Ringo had recuperated from his sore throat, and he was ready to join up with the band. He actually said he felt left out by the boys performing without him. Ringo would meet up with the Beatles roadshow in Melbourne. After 8 concerts with John, Paul, and George, Jimmie Nicol's talents were no longer required. On June 14, 1964, Jimmie was ushered out of the Southern Cross Hotel without saying goodbye to the others. Just hours earlier, he had been waving to 300,000 fans from a hotel balcony. Now he was sitting alone at Essendon Airport with his Beatle boots and souvenir Beatle bag. Brian had given him his £500 check and an engraved watch. A gold 1964 Swiss-made Eternomatic Centenaire model was valued at about $150 back then. Today this watch, with provenance, would be quite a valuable collectible. Just like John Lennon's Patek Philippe watch inscribed, "Just like starting over. Love, Yoko. October 9, 1980, NYC." That watch has been valued at $40 million. So what does one do after spending a week in 1964 being a Beatle? In a rare statement after returning home, Jimmie said, "Standing in for Ringo was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Until then I was quite happy earning £30 or £40 a week. After the headlines died, I began dying too." Jimmie then reformed the Shubdubs. However, in an attempt to capitalize in his fame, they changed their name to Jimmie Nicol and the Shubdubs. One month later, on June 12, 1964, the Beatles performed at the Brighton Hippodrome. One of the opening acts that night was Jimmie Nicol and the Shubdubs. It was also the same night that George crashed his brand new Jaguar on the way to the gig. Unfortunately, Jimmie's personal life spiraled out of control. His wife and son left him. Just 9 months after his stint as a Beatle, Jimmie filed for bankruptcy and was living in his mother's basement. Paul McCartney got Jimmie a gig as drummer for a Peter and Gordon tour in 1967. Jimmie then joined the Swedish space-themed instrumental group, the Spotniks. He left the Spotniks in 1967 and moved to Mexico. He formed the band Los Nickelquin with fellow musician Eddie Quinn. They put out one album in 1967. In 1975, Jimmie left Mexico and returned to England where he worked as a laborer doing home renovations. Can you imagine doing some drywall and during lunch your coworker tells you stories about when he was the drummer for the Beatles? Pretty cool. Jimmie appeared as a guest at a Beatles convention in Amsterdam in 1984. Here are a few interesting comments he gave. Question: It has been said that technically you were a better drummer than Ringo Starr. Without being unkind, Ringo Starr isn't really a drummer. The Beatles weren't the greatest band. In fact, as a group, they were pretty bad. Question. It must have been a fascinating experience to be inside that circle for a while. It was disappointing, not fascinating, because I had been used to it before. Question. After you went back to England, did you ever meet anyone? No, never. One time I was playing in a club in London, and George happened to come in one evening with a lady friend, and he sent the waiter with a drink, but I declined the offer. A common question asked is, did Jimmie make any money from any Beatles media like Pete Best did? When the Beatles Anthology 1 compilation was released in 1995, it contained 7 tracks featuring Pete Best. They could have altered those tracks. However, Paul insisted on using the original Pete Best tracks. Pete doesn't own any of the songwriting copyright or get any song publishing royalties. He was paid a flat $8 million for the use of his likeness and performance in the book, albums and TV special, with one caveat. The living Beatles did not want him speaking in the anthology video. I met Pete Best at a Beatles convention in the late 80s. At that time he was signing autographs and playing in the Pete Best band. As for Jimmie Nicol, he did not make any money from the Beatles anthology project. His 1964 performances were not officially released on records or included in the anthology audio, preventing him from receiving ongoing royalties from the project. In an ironic twist of fate, Jimmie's son Howie Nicol worked as a sound engineer on the Beatles' 1995 anthology project. During this time, Paul asked Howie if he could contact Jimmie. Howie told Paul simply no. The last photo of Jimmie Nicol was from 2010. Here he is, standing in front of his rented flat in Kentish Town, wearing what appears to be a vintage Eternomatic watch. According to Howie Nicol, he hasn't had any contact with his father in decades. Here is Jimmie's photo, age progressed to what he would look like today at age 86. In 2017, Roy Orbison's son Alex expressed his desire to produce a film about the life of Jimmie Nicol. But 9 years later, it appears that the film will not come to fruition. When asked about the possibility of a film about his father, Howie Nicol said his father would be aghast at the idea. Howie, who bears a striking resemblance to his father, appeared at a 2013 event in Amsterdam, commemorating his father playing drums with the Beatles. Jimmie Nicol was mentioned by John in this scene from the Peter Jackson documentary Get Back in 2024.
I remember why I stopped getting solos. Because you remember all the time. Just, oh yeah!
Oh, remember those shows?
There's no sense of tone.
Those tours, we just miss out half the song. That one with Jimmie Nicol.
A 1, 2. A 1, 2.
She loves you in Sweden.
In Sweden, yeah. Well,
First time we'd ever had this new drummer because Ringo was sick, and he was sitting up on this rostrum, but he was just eyeing up all the women. We just 1, 2, and we 1, 2, and he just.
it's so much fun, but it's over before it's begun.
Here is the very latest on Jimmie Nicol. I can tell you the following. First off, the 86-year-old chap is very much alive. He has left Great Britain to take up permanent residency in Mexico, and he has become a naturalized Mexican citizen. Unlike the United States, Mexico allows for dual citizenship, so Jimmie is allowed to receive his UK state pension while living there, but he does not get yearly increases. I also know a few things that Jimmie, who now goes by James, chooses not to do. He doesn't want to be a guest on anyone's podcast. He doesn't want to meet up with acquaintances from 65 years ago for any reason. He doesn't want to sit behind a table in some hotel banquet hall, signing his name for $100 a pop. He doesn't want to be shuffled backstage to stand next to Paul McCartney for a photo op. And, most importantly, what James does want to do is to live out his golden years simply and privately with those who care about him. To that I say, good for you. You don't owe anyone anything. I hope you are in good health and are surrounded by friends who care about you. Finally, your life is not defined by 14 days in 1964. We tip our hats to you, Jimmie Nicol. Thank you, sir. And thank you for watching.